Oh, it's good to see you again, Dr. Sproul.
Good to be with you, Steve.
Now, we're in your library again, and this time we've pulled 3 volumes off of the shelf.
Right.
So this is, we probably have to help some folks with this one. This is Francis Turretin, and the French would be, Francois Turretini.
Yes.
So we'll just call him Francis Turretin.
Yes.
This is his 3-volume Institutes of Elenctic Theology.
Yes.
And you were pretty busy underlining in this book, especially when we get to Turretin's Doctrine of God.
Yeah.
It's always the doctrine of God with you, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is.
So we'll get to that in a moment. But just tell me a little bit about why Turretin?
Well, when you think back the history of theology, and I love the great titans of the faith, Augustine, Anselm, St. Thomas, Luther, Calvin, Edwards,
Yeah.
These are the really great ones. And each one of them has its own particular emphasis and style. Luther, for example, wasn't a systematician.
No.
He didn't organize theology in these different systemic ways. But he had these brilliant individual vignettes of insight, from which the world was changed. Augustine had such a deep philosophical background and understanding of things, and then Aquinas was the high scholasticism of the Middle Ages, and I don't know if there was ever a peer. In fact, if you would ask me who I thought were the 3 most brilliant theologians in all of history, I would say Edwards, Aquinas, and Francis Turretin.
Okay.
I mean, Calvin was the real deal in the 16th century, and his brilliance, his knowledge, his ability to have a systemic understanding, coherent understanding of the things of God was just marvelous. And people are often critical of what happened in the 17th century. In the 16th century, in the first generation, or the early days, there was a spontaneity, a sense of spiritual awakening and so on. And then in the 17th century, which was called the Age of Reason, with the philosophy of rationalism and all the rest, it talks about the high period of scholasticism and of the reification of Christian, of Reformed Orthodoxy, and some people sneer at that and look down their nose at it. That they will see Turretin as being dry and all of that, and just a purely logical. Say, but this is the thing I love the most about Turretin. He does the close work, the really difficult stuff that requires the deepest kind of sharp analysis in theology. I don't think there's anybody better than Turretin. And Turretin's influence through the years, we think about the acme of American academic theology was at Old Princeton, and you with the titans of guys like Charles Hodge and B.B. Warfield. And both Hodge and Warfield were deeply dependent on Turretin. Of course, it wasn't available in English, but they read Latin.
That's right.
And in fact, you read Hodge, half his books in Latin. But the thing is, they were so dependent on Turretin, and that's because Turretin was so precise.
He was the standard.
He was the standard.
Yeah, and I think your word there is the right word. There's a precision, there's a careful precision, and when we're talking about these doctrines, and we're talking about the doctrine of God, we have to have precision.
Oh, yes. And also, there were disputes that arose in the 17th century that were a little different from, the 16th century dispute was pretty much with Rome and all that. But then later you had to deal with the Remonstrants in Holland, and also with the Socinians, which was the 17th century answer to 19th century liberalism. And you have this polemic response of Turretin to those heretical movements, and he was outstanding in that. Several years ago, the Presbyterian Reformed Publishing Company published a monograph, one little book on
Right.
justification.
By Turretin.
They took Turretin's justification statements and put it as a separate book. And
Yes.
they did it at my urging and request. And so
great.
the price I had to pay for that was to write the historical preface to
Yes.
Turretin and all of that. And I was thinking today, I don't remember what I even wrote in all of that, because the most of what on the life of Turretin I've forgotten, even though I wrote that
Right.
particular piece. But I just thought that his article on justification was so clear, so vital, that I wanted to see it appear as a separate work.
So that actually, I think, whet the appetite, because then after that justification volume came out, Turretin was inaccessible. He was in Latin. As you said.
Right.
In fact, I think the story has it that Turretin was the textbook at Princeton, and Hodge finally relented to write his own because students didn't know Latin.
No Latin, yeah.
And as you said, I think Hodge would always put the punchline, as it were, by bringing Turretin in to give the answer, and
Yes,
he would
right.
quote him in Latin. So he got his students after all.
Right.
But then, following the publication of the justification volume, P&R put out this. It's hefty. It's the 3 volumes,
3 volumes.
and it's translated, and it's in English, and it's available.
Yes.
And you have it.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm looking at your copy, and it's fairly underlined.
Yes, it is. It's I've read that. I read through that on more than one occasion, Steve.
I can tell. And Turretin, because of the way he writes, it's easy to go back.
Yes.
And just find out. If you just want to.
If I have the one particular question
issue,
of one particular
Yeah.
point, boom, you can get right and find it.
In fact, I think I found one of the volumes on your desk, which makes me think you were using it recently.
That's exactly why you found it on my desk, because I was reading it, using it.
Turretin, and maybe folks don't know about him, he would have been at Geneva, right? He was at Calvin's
Calvin, of course,
Academy.
started, and Beza was the main professor there at the Academy.
Yes.
But then one of the successors of Beza at the Geneva Academy was Turretin.
Turretin. So he carried on that work.
Yes,
and,
he did.
Brought it to be, and now we have it, and we have it in English.
Yes.
So, well, thank you, Dr. Sproul, for letting us visit your library again. Thanks for letting us look at these. Oh, we didn't even, maybe we should define this as we go out here. Elenctic theology. That's probably a new word for people.
Yeah, well, it really doesn't mean anything all that sophisticated. It just means a way of talking about teaching. And explaining. And back in the 16th century, as I mentioned, there was a controversy between followers of Calvin and followers of Luther over the issue of the place of the law in the Christian life. And Calvin, of course, developed his threefold use of the law, and most importantly, the so-called tertius usus, the third use of the law that is valuable for the Christian. Luther didn't like that, and he emphasized what he called the usus elenticus, which was the teaching. I mean, the whole point of the law was to drive people to Christ, to be the schoolmaster, to teach, and then to teach us our need for them. And then once that has been fulfilled, that's why Luther's often been called an antinomian, was that he was a little bit light on the way in which the law works in the life of the Christian.
Calvin might have had the better of the argument.
I think he did, without any question.
But that's where this word elenctic comes from.
Yes.
Turretin is a teacher.
Yes.
And he gives us this wonderful teaching
Right.
in his 3-volume theology. Thanks for letting us know about it. And I'll go ahead and return these to you so you can keep working through them.
That should be in every Christian's library, as difficult as it may be to read, because it's heavy stuff. It really is heavy stuff, but this is soundness. You want to find sound theology, here it is.
There you go. Well, that's the final word then. Dr. Sproul, you got it.
Okay.
Thanks, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Steve.